He says is a brilliant speaker, author, artist, and educator who provides live performances and intensive workshops around mental health and personal growth. His message resonates to students from middle school to college, as well as professionals in a diverse range of industries. If you have a head and a heart, what SC says will impact you profoundly. He is a very talented advocate and speaker, and also a very close friend of mine. I'm so excited to have him as a guest on L3 today. All right, so I'm here with Andre Bradford, goes by SC Says, that's his pen name. Andre's a super close friend of mine. I admire his work. I admire him as a person. I'm really excited to have him on today. The idea behind L3 by Flourish is to bring on therapists, mental health professionals, content creators, solopreneurs, people in this space of the human experience and how we convert really sensitive and sentimental topics and really important topics into business, into concepts, into things that drive our growth and drive our business. And it's kind of a tricky translation sometimes between the human sentiment that we might feel and we feel passion for and the stories we want to tell, and then the business product that is being marketed and being sold and being spread. And I think there's no other better person to talk about that transition process than Andre. Me and Andre now have known each other for 3-4 years at this point. Again, he's a close friend of mine. We've shared a lot of love over live music. I've seen his performances a few times. I remember the first time I saw Andre perform slam poetry, which is his medium of choice and something he does across states, across universities, and all the audiences he brings it to. I remember him inviting me to slam poetry the first time, and it was a very just casual thing. Oh, come by on Tuesdays at this place in Austin. Come check it out. And I was new in town, new in Austin. And I was like, of course, why not? He seems friendly. Let's see how this goes. And so then I go and I hang out with him at the slam poetry, and he's just very kind of subdued and modest and kind of blends in and just doing his own thing. And I left that night being like, okay, yeah, I can come back to this. I like this space. Slam poetry is a really cool medium. Andre's, friendly and nice. That's cool. And I think the next time I went to slam poetry, I saw Andre get on stage, and he actually performed in a competition night, and I was blown away. And he's a professional. He brings it. He brings out so much emotion in his work, in his performances. He infuses humor seamlessly into very emotional topics around his performances. And it just blew me away. That's someone very down to earth and very modest and very, just invite you and have you come over to the scene. Turned out to be this rock star in the scene and really kind of takes the stage and owns the room. So, I love you, man. I really appreciate the time today. I really look forward to exploring the different topics and the different things we have in common, which of course include mental health, the advancement of business in the human experience industry, and anything else we have.
Dude, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Right on, man. So the first question I am trying to ask, and I think this is a good place to start with most people and most conversations, is when did you first hear about the term mental health? How did it land? What chord did it strike? What age were you? Where were you at in life? When did you first hear about mental health? What was your opinion, expectations, reaction?
I think the first time that I heard the term mental health, I was in college, maybe my junior or senior year. And I think I was going through a really hard time. And probably like my mom or maybe a friend of mine was just like, how's your mental health doing, or something to that effect. And I understood the term. I mean, it's kind of in the name, but I never really I never really put those two things together, like the health of your mentality, the health of your mind. And I remember it kind of giving me pause, and then just being like the typical guy thing, like I'm good, I'm fine. So at least initially, it wasn't something that I really put a lot of thought into. But as my own experiences with depression specifically really started to take a downturn, that word kept popping up over and over again. And then following that would be, how are you managing your mental health? And the answer was consistently like, I'm doing nothing really to kind of or take care of this aspect of my overall health. And so it didn't really start out as something that I was remotely interested in, let alone passionate about. But through my own experiences with depression, it became something that I eagerly was seeking to understand more.
There's such a like crucial time period, I'd say, for men. I think young boys too, it's like 15 to maybe 21, 22. I worked in a residential program for boys with dual diagnoses, so they had drug issues as well as mental health diagnoses, and they were 14 to 17, and I myself was 23. So the difference wasn't that great, and I kind of saw myself in these boys in a lot of ways, and they probably saw themselves in me. It was such a cool melting pot of growth, and at different stages it's kind of like it was a time trip thing of like, that was me maybe 6 years ago, this is, and they looked at me like, this is going to be me in a few years. But that's such a hotbed, I think, for a lot of young men, is that 15 to 23 of identity. Who am I? How do I become a man? What does this mean? What does my mental health mean? How do I express feelings? Do I have other feelings besides anger that I'm not attending to? So there's a lot there, especially, yeah, certainly with young men. And on that, I know a lot of your work is in schools. It's with younger people. Andre does a lot of work across industries. He's with professionals, associations, conferences, any sort of public speaking setting. He nails. I've noticed, though, he does a lot of work with students, universities, high schools, even middle schools. So what are you seeing when you go to these schools? What's the state of mental health with this younger generation in schools? Again, if you work in different types of schools, I'm sure in different areas of the country, different styles of school, private versus public, what are you seeing from students and young people around the topics that you cover, which mental health?
Encouragingly, I'm seeing a lot more focus on mental health than I think definitely has been in the past, but in more and more spaces is becoming heavily prioritized. And so I speak a lot at private schools, independent schools that definitely have a lot more resources and funding to be able to afford, like one or two counselors to be full time on staff. And so because of that, I think it's become more a part of the conversation because they have an avenue to help remedy some of these issues, or at least kind of alleviate some of them. And so at some of the public schools, there's still very much this idea of like, you're kind of wearing a bunch of hats, and if you have a counselor, it's usually for college education. Like they're just trying to guide you on picking the right path to get you into a good college, and not so much on like the mental health aspects of your educational career. And so like I remember in my school, I was in public school my entire from like pre-K all the way to graduating in senior year, and we had college counselors, I think three of them for like 4,000 students, right? And so it's an enormous undertaking for anyone with that amount of students. And my senior year, a friend of mine committed suicide. And I remember that was the first time we'd ever had a psychiatrist come to our school and like offer support for anybody that was navigating grief or trying to understand their own emotions for what just happened. And we had them for like 2 days. That was it. And then they just kind of, I guess, assumed that we would be good after that. And so that was my real like understanding of how mental health would be handled in schools. And so I'm really encouraged because a lot of the schools that I go to, it's not just that they have the resources to help manage it, but it's an active part of the conversation. It's a part of the curriculum. Like how do we understand anxiety? How do we understand PTSD? How do we understand trauma in these different environments? And encouragingly, even more encouragingly, there are students that are leading these initiatives. There was a performance I did at a school, I think it was in Massachusetts, and after the performance, a student came up to me and was like, I started the mental health organization at my school, and we do this thing where we have these bracelets. I think they were orange, and it meant that if a student was wearing one of the orange bracelets, like they were kind of a safe space to talk about mental health. And I just thought that was so cool. And he was like pioneering this idea to other schools, and other schools were kind of adopting this idea. And so encouragingly, there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of passion and intentionality around making sure that these are not just things that students are learning about in college or as adults, but that we're taught because they are experiencing these things now and trying to come up with good, healthy ways to cope with that. at the same time, I think that is absolutely kind of an effective privilege, right? So these schools that will have sometimes like between 30 to, I was just talking to a school today where their tuition a year is $60,000 for high school, right?
Wow.
Uh, they have the funds to be able to prioritize these issues, and a lot of schools where these issues are very prevalent do not. There's a school that I went and spoke at in Texas. And the main reason that they brought me in, I do a lot of presentations around like diversity appreciation and empathy development. But the main reason they brought me in was because they had the highest suicide rate of any county in Texas. And they wanted me to come in and talk about mental health. And I'm doing this presentation in an auditorium, and I'm a Jamaican and Mexican. I'm like the only brown person there. And I'm talking to all these students about my own experiences. But when I get to the mental health portion, it's like, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, they like leaned in. Like, oh, someone's actually talking about this to us. And that was probably the longest line of students that I've ever had for any presentation. And they all wanted to talk to me about their own experiences with like suicide ideation and like crippling depression, and how their parents were also navigating these things. And so while I think it's great that these things they're coming more into light, I also have seen that the resources to combat these issues are still not there and are still not really prioritized. I remember the coordinator that brought me to the school had to work really hard to get them to agree to bring me there, just because they don't see this as the main cause. They see the effects, they see the suicide rates, they see the drug addictions, but they're not really trying to address the root. They're just trying to find like a quick solution. So in some ways, it's very encouraging right now. But a lot of times the encouragement comes from places of affluence and wealth, and not so much in the places that honestly really maybe need it more.
There's such an unseen element to mental health, as we all know. I'm sure your role is like a pressure release valve, right? There's probably, especially in that
Mm.
county where there's a high suicide rate, there's such a tension building in a community around a very obvious problem, but no one knows really how to talk about it or even bring it
Yeah.
up. So people
Yeah.
like yourself, maybe people that go in and perform and say something that hasn't been said, you probably feel this release in the community, and that's probably why they came up and wanted to speak with you and connect with you on it. And you've told me other situations too where other professionals, imagine adults, older adults that really may not know how to talk about this, you provide this release to be able to. But it's funny because mental health is the secret that everybody has, and we all know we have it, but nobody wants to talk about it, right? It's something everybody can look to, your neighbor, to your friend, whoever it is. Everyone has a brain. Everyone knows we probably have feelings and things we're dealing with. But it's a secret nobody wants to let out of the bag. At least they don't themselves. But they're super relieved when somebody else does. So where we are right now, it requires, where I see it is there's like this episodic treatment around behavioral health and mental health, where once in a while, when things are getting really bad, when things are tight, maybe for an event or two, I tend to my mental health when it gets really bad and I notice it, as
Mhm.
opposed to continuous, everyday, community based, kids running their own mental health clubs in schools is amazing. That's something where every week kids can go and can talk and can connect. It doesn't have to be, oh, at my breaking point, I'm going to seek something or I'm going to talk to somebody. It can be done way before then. It can be preventative, as we all know. Um, Something I want to hit on based around you talking around, kids and growing up. It sounds like in your younger, high school, college days, when you kind of had this formation of what mental health was, did you see yourself ever kind of working in that field and telling your story? Because I know you have a performing arts background, acting in undergrad. And then I know you worked, a bunch of years in sales roles and kind of your traditional jobs, and that working now, what you're doing as a professional speaker, solopreneur, is a relatively recent development. Do you ever think that back then, when you were first discovering what mental health was, figuring out for yourself, navigating things during kind of the college years, did you ever think there was going to be a line that connected you from that point to, I have a story to tell everybody, and this is how I'm going to maximize what this is for me?
No, not even close. I I was so, at least at that stage of my life, I was so passionate and adamant about telling other people's stories. I had a theater background. I loved being on stage, and crafting stories. and telling communal stories, but I really never entertained the idea of telling my own story, let alone talking about the issues or the stresses or the frustrations going on in my life. That was something that matured kind of organically and kind of against my better intentions and like conscious intentions. This was something I was kind of just doing for fun. I started doing slam poetry as an outlet because I was doing a lot of commercial auditions where you're smiling really big for a camera. You're not really portraying any character. You're just trying to sell a product, and that was kind of soul drenching at times. And I just wanted an outlet where I could be in front of an audience, feel the energy that they were giving, and tell a really good story. And just happened to find slam poetry at a time when I really needed that space. And so that the idea that I would connect not only my story, share my story, and then find a way to talk about my own depression, never once would have crossed my mind at that stage in my life, just because I was so focused on telling other people's stories and getting really good at embodying characters. And I think that's where a lot of the foundation, at least for me, for empathy was set in. Was, I mean, that's what acting is essentially, is literally putting on the skin of another person and trying to see the world from their perspective. And so a lot of the foundation of the work that I do today did start there, but I wasn't mature enough to really connect those dots.
Understandable. And while we're on this, I wanted to ask really about the transition that you had from kind of working your traditional jobs into, as he says, into professional solo slam poetry and performance. What was that career pivot like? What were the logistics? What were the pain points? What was that transition like for you professionally?
Well, when I graduated college with a theater degree, I moved to Austin to kind of like start building up a resume, and there just was not nearly enough work to make that sustainable. So I knew I needed another job. Started working as a salesman selling cars. I sold Acuras for like a year and a half of my life, which, ah, man, that just ruined my soul for a long time. Never sell cars, people. Just never do that to yourself. And that did give me some really necessary kind of like sales foundational skills, something that I would not appreciate at the time, but would absolutely come into play later in my life. From there, I move into doing inside sales for IT. I love technology. I'm a big proponent for like new developments in technology and making our lives more efficient and easier. And selling IT, at least for me, was more interesting than selling cars. So I did that for 2.5 years. And in that time, I found slam poetry. So I'm working at this job that I don't particularly love. I'm still trying to pursue acting and telling and storytelling, but I found this really cool outlet for sharing and crafting my own story. And as I was finding my voice in that, a buddy of mine, who's now a really good friend, Iggy Muala, he was doing this group called Cometry that blended stand-up comedy and slam poetry and used it as a form of edutainment. And when he said that to me, the light bulb went off. I was like, oh, there's something more to this art form. I loved that this art form could be vulnerable, could be raw, could give people, could, like, to your point, could kind of be that like pressure release valve for so many different topics. Is there a way that we could utilize this art form to generate really good discussion around important issues? So I'd already kind of had that idea germinating. I met Iggy at a time where that was really starting to become a passion of mine, and joined Cometry and really got to see that this art form could get people to lean in a way that a YouTube video couldn't, or in a way that like a professor giving a lecture couldn't. I could get people to snap, to clap, to laugh at things like depression, at things like anxiety. I could get them to appreciate things like kindness on a human fundamental level, and see the results of that in real time. And so that really started to shift what I thought my purpose or my role in this art form could be. And once the idea was solidified and I saw that I could make money doing this, it was just a matter of time of building up that pipeline for me. I was already doing slam poetry around a bunch of different topics. I had the idea of wanting to communicate why empathy was so vital for all these different aspects of our lives. And I now had a model through Cometry that it was viable to kind of like make a financially sustainable living off of this. So once I had like all of those pieces in place, then I really started to reshift from kind of just working the 9 to 5 and being okay with that to, well, what would it look like if I did this full time? What would I need? What would the resources that I need to have? How much money would I need to make to be able to actually do this sustainably? And then what do I need to kind of move into? What tools do I need? What resources do I need to have available to me to make this a possibility? And so, kind of like going back to my selling cars days, I had a good blueprint for how to get people interested in a product. And now the product was me. I'm selling this message around empathy, using slam poetry to get people to engage with it in a new way. And by doing that, I just needed to find a way to market it to people that got them excited about it. Well, I had a great sales background. I actually minored in marketing in college. I had the tool set to actually bring this like idea into reality, and all I really needed to do was execute on it. So I wrote a show around empathy. I kind of picked some of the main points around that show that are highlighted in that show, and I started just like sending that the kind of blueprint for the show out to different schools, saying, "Hey, I'm a slam poet. I've been winning some competitions. I have this really amazing message around empathy that I'm really passionate about. Would you be interested?" And so many people started saying yes. So once I got my first yes, I was kind of like off to the races for me. I ended up working from the time that I did my first show to the time I quit my job was 4 years. So it took me 4 years from doing my first presentation on my own to finding out that I could like run this business sustainably and being able to quit my job. 4 years of really building up that business. In the midst of that, COVID happened, really slowed down a lot of my momentum. But so many times after a performance, I had a student, I had a professor, I had a CEO come up to me with tears in their eyes saying like, "Thank you. I really needed to hear this today." And that kept giving me the momentum on the days when it was so stressful and I kept wondering if I could even do this. That gave me the momentum to keep pushing forward. And now it's like my full-time job. And I love getting to do what I do, even though at times it could be remarkably stressful, not knowing where your next paycheck is going to come from. But this whole process wasn't necessarily, in my mind, it wasn't linear, it wasn't planned. It was just kind of like taking the tool set that I already have and being willing to adapt that to a new passion that I had now.
I wanted to hit on that exact point and go a little deeper. So it's, again, super beneficial that you had this sales background, right? How to tell a story, how to, negotiate, how to maybe cold call, do outreach. The question I had, and something I think a lot of creators and entrepreneurs, solopreneurs would benefit from, is how do you sell something like this, right? And how do you craft a curriculum and craft a product? It might seem really strange to take something really personal and make it into something you sell and share with other people. I mean, there's the sharing aspect of it, but then also, charging something for it and having it be a product and be a sustainable part of your business and your livelihood. So could we go a little deeper? What kind of things, what kind of marketing tool sets, what kind of things from your sales past, what would you recommend and what advice would you give to people when they have something really that resonates with them? They want to craft it into something that resonates with other people. And then how do you make it into a product the best you can without sacrificing any of the personal, touch and things like that make it special? What's that process like?
Yeah, well, the first caveat is that this may be like art style specific. So the way that I would approach this process as a slam poet might be totally different than the way that you would approach it as a DJ or a paint artist or something. But I think a lot of the fundamentals can still apply. And the first aspect is just like, what story do you want to tell? That was kind of like the main thing. When I sat down, I was like, okay, I think I want to do this. I think I want to use slam poetry as a career. What story do I want to tell? And for me, like almost immediately, the biggest thing came up to being about empathy. This was also around the time, like I think it was like roughly 2016, 2015. There's a lot of division. There's a lot of like political turmoil. And I'm seeing all this, and I'm also at the same time seeing the way that slam poetry was bringing a lot of that conflict together in a really like productive way. It was really powerful to see people having conversations that would just ordinarily not, and having real conversations and not service level ones. So I'm seeing this wonderful thing happen, and I know that there's an art form that I'm utilizing that can help facilitate that. What's the message that I want to communicate? And then how could I get people excited about that message? So for me, it was empathy. I kept looking at a lot of my poetry and I saw that there was this through line of just like, what if we could understand each other's perspectives a little bit better? What would that world look like? What if you understood me better? What if I understood you better? Would that benefit our society? And empathy played a huge role in just kind of like setting the foundation for that. So once I knew the main, like kind of like the highlights, the halo car of what I wanted to sell, then it was about crafting that message and then getting people excited about that message. So I wrote a show that I hadn't even memorized. I wasn't sure was going to sell well, but I had the ideas really concrete based on conversations that I'd had, based on what I'd already seen from commentary work really well, and based on what I was passionate about. I took those ideas even before they were fully formed and memorized and like show ready, and I started pitching those ideas just to get a feel for if that was what people were excited about. And once I got some yeses, I realized like, okay, this is the thing in my email that I sent that they really like latched onto. Okay, that needs to be a really core point of my show. This was something that I hadn't really considered that they got out of my email. That needs to be a core component of my show. So when I started reaching out and prospecting to different schools, the feedback that I got from those emails were also things that I then incorporated into my main product. So having a clear idea of the story that you want to tell, the messaging that you want to give, and then how you think you should market that, and then testing that, like sending those out and seeing if people get excited about that, and then being willing to adjust, to not just get stuck into one style of reaching out, one style of cold calling, one style of prospecting, and really being willing to let your market, your target audience, tell you what they're interested in, what they're hoping to get out of your product. That also played a huge role. Something that I really appreciate about you, Ryan, is that like when I have an idea about how I want to market a thing, I'll run that idea by you, and you'll give me really awesome feedback. And so it was also really important to me to have people in my circle that I could kind of bounce some of these ideas around with. Around that time, it was my buddy Iggy. I was also communicating just like, hey, I've got this idea for the show. What do you think? How did you start commentary? What works for y'all? So I had a good core, like kind of network of people that I could ask sales questions, marketing questions, artistic questions, and I used that to influence my product. Something that I just wish I'd known about a little bit sooner was also having like a good structure for how you wanted to reach out to these different prospects. So at the very beginning, when I was starting this, I had an Excel sheet. I was going through a bunch of different school websites. I was finding email addresses. I was putting them into an Excel sheet. And the Excel sheet was great for kind of documenting information, but it was not a good follow-up system. So I was having these really amazing conversations with schools that were really excited to bring me. And then I would forget to follow up with them because my system wasn't designed to help me do that. And so I think something that you really should prioritize early on, even as an artist, what systems am I going to have in place? Because if all you do is like look at your inbox, that is going to be so difficult to kind of remember and manage day to day. Having a system in place that allows you to follow up, to know where a client is at in the sales process can be the difference between success and failure. And I didn't learn that until I'd already lost like 5 or 6 different deals because I just didn't follow up on them. So having some kind of CRM system, a customer relation management system, having some kind of your own like schedule. One of the hardest things for me as a solopreneur is scheduling. Like I wake up in the beginning of the day and there's no one to tell me specifically what to do to build my business. So I have to find out different structures, try different things to come up with a system that I think will be sustainable to help me grow. So coming up with a good product and like a message that you're really passionate about, testing that product, having a good system, and then like making sure that you've got a good network of people around you to kind of give you honest feedback about what's working and not working, I think will help, regardless of what your art form is, to do this. Knowing whatever audience you want to target, these 3 things will help you to take whatever core idea you have and turn it into a kind of sustainable business.
I heard somewhere recently, and I kind of been grappling with these ideas with my own business around when do I connect and when do I focus my energy on extending out and trying to prospect, reach people, kind of connect and reach out, right? And then the other energy I have is, well, I want to create. I want to be really precise with what I offer. I want to get better at my craft. So there's like this creation craft energy, and there's sort of this outreach energy. And to go a little deeper into what you're talking about, I'm sure it feels like two completely different sides of your brain, right? Where you're prospecting and having to be extremely methodical and technical, and really, just kind of covering every single base and being kind of really rigid with yourself and disciplined. And then you have the creative process, which I would imagine is a little bit more about releasing, about letting things happen, about not getting tight at all, letting
Yeah.
things flow a little bit, making yourself comfortable in a space, making yourself comfortable in your head to kind of get things going. So, how do you balance that? You touched on that a little bit, but how would you, because these things seem to be very opposite of each other. Not everybody is a performing artist, but also runs their business. So, someone in your shoes, how do you balance that? It just seems like two different sides of the brain. I'm sure sometimes it's nice to get a break. I know we've talked about that before, where maybe you're deep in the creative process and it's been good and rewarding, but it's good to kind of do something mindless, like
Yeah.
prospecting and research and doing that sort of logistical work. How do you balance that? What are some pros and cons around that?
So probably for 4 years, I've been trying to figure out the answer to this question. Because before I did this full time, I just wrote when I felt like writing.
Yeah.
I would. It didn't matter the time of day, didn't matter where I was. I would just have an idea for a poem or a line, and I would just kind of go. But with doing this full time, I think it took away some of that spontaneity for me, because
Mm.
now a lot of my poetry definitely has kind of like a purpose. There's a use case for this poem, and I want to make sure that it's reaching the audience that it's supposed to. And so there's kind of a different initiative for a lot of my creativity. And so to balance that, I've kind of actually had to do what I didn't want to do, which was schedule time to write, to be creative, which
Mm.
seems, at least in my mind, counterintuitive, or counter like productive for creativity. I think some of the best poems I've ever written just came out of nowhere. They were very spontaneous. They were in the moment, and yet because I'm having fewer of those with how structured I've needed to be for my business, it's now become very important for me to be intentional with scheduling time to be creative, because if I don't do that, I don't create. I write so many fewer poems now than I used to, just because like I'm constantly traveling. I'm constantly utilizing my poetry in a different way than when I had started writing poetry. And so I've just kind of had to renegotiate my relationship with creativity. And right now, at least, that looks like scheduling time to be creative, just to have the freedom of space. When I'm in that time, I like allow myself to have no pressure. I don't want there to be like some specific necessary poem or line that I have to create during this time. I still try to be spontaneous in that time. I just now I know I have to prioritize making that time. Otherwise, no creativity is happening. And so that's also like detrimental to myself mentally, but also for my business. So scheduling time to be creative has actually helped me balance my creativity, because now it's not just work, 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 and then hopefully at some point I'm creative. Now I get to kind of contrast that work time or that focus time with freedom of creative expression. So, for example, right now my schedule kind of looks like morning, wake up, workout, answer emails, prospect, come up with any kind of like creative marketing or advertising stuff that I need to work on. And then usually by like 4 or 5, those things have been accomplished, or they've been earmarked for another time. And then the rest of the time that I'm quote unquote working, I'm just using that as creative space, as creative freedom to do anything creative that I want to get done. That could be writing poetry, that could be working on social media content, that could be updating creative copy on my website, whatever it is that I feel like fills that creative bucket. That's where that time goes. And that's actually allowed me to both balance the work that I know needs to get done with the creativeness that I prioritize for myself and I kind of take a lot of pride in. And it's given me, at least in my mind, a sense of balance. I know that I'm dedicating time to be creative. I know that I'm dedicating time to grow my business. I don't feel like now one is dominating the other one.
There's such an interesting relationship between the structure we all need and the create and like the space to expand and flow. And yeah, it's something everyone struggles with. I think even people that are in regular jobs and kind of do their own thing. Yeah, it's always a constant navigation of finding that right balance. Another thing I read recently, a lot of ideas come, I think, when we're not trying, when it's like we're in the shower or we're driving or after a workout or during a workout or during exercise. sometimes the brain just needs to kind of just turn off in a conscious way, and that's kind
Yeah.
of when things flow through us. I know for me, it's like after a yoga class or during a yoga class, during a meditation or a breath work, sometimes at the very end, I have like 3 or 4 really cool ideas that I couldn't have accessed earlier in the day if I tried to. You know, you really have to let the body kind of activate and do something else for really things to kind of flow through and come up. It sounds like that spontaneity was there before, but now you have to be more conscious with your time and put time into other things that require your attention. And so, yeah, that's just kind of part of growing and scaling, I would imagine. One more thing I wanted to hit on before we sign off is you mentioned earlier you being a tech head, and I know we talk about this all the time. You love the new stuff that's coming out. You used to sell, I mean, be a salesperson in the tech space, and we've talked about this at length as well in the past. What do you see the future as for your industry, for storytelling, for creative arts and creative space, for mental health, for that matter as well? How can we leverage technology? How can we leverage maybe VR, AI, all these awesome innovations to enhance human connection, human experience, performance art, all the things you touch on? What kind of things do you see there in the future?
So I will say that there are aspects of our rapidly developing technology that do make me nervous. One example of that is I was teaching a middle school slam poetry writing workshop, and they had to come up with their own poems. And a couple of students came to the class without anything. The next day, they had this amazing, mind-blowing poem. And it turns out that they just typed in a prompt, an AI prompt somewhere, and that gave them that poem, and that's what they brought to class. So I do think, at least for the people that want to be lazy with creativity, AI is going to make that so easy for them to do. Technology is going to make that so easy for them to do. And I think storytelling will take a hit because of that. On the other side of that, though, I have seen some really cool use cases for technology and allowing you to kind of just come up with creative ideas that you wouldn't have otherwise. So a lot of the ways that I personally use like new technology like AI is just idea generation. Like if I want to write a poem about relationships or marriage, I can put in hey, what are some weird things that people wouldn't normally associate with marriage? And like it can give me a bunch of prompts that I then can use as ideation or idea generation for a new piece. Some really cool things that I'm excited to see are within animation. Animation is such an amazing storytelling style. Some of my favorite stories of the last like 5 years have been animated. I think Inside Out 2, the massive global success of that is a great testament. There's a great show on Netflix called Arcane that is just beautiful to watch. And then the story underneath it is just so good. And AI and our advancements in technology are making it easier for anybody to make those kinds of stories. It used to be you had to be Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks to make animated stories. That's no longer the case. Now I can type in, or I can just do a voiceover of the story that I want to tell. And some program can now create animations to go along with that. I think that is going to empower so many storytellers to tell stories that they just like they have in their heads, but couldn't really like produce on a film or on a stage. But now they can animate. And so I think technology is going to give us an amazing way to tell new stories in new creative ways. I'm also a big proponent now for VR and augmented reality. And it's been really cool to see some of the storytelling aspects that are coming out of that. There have been these really immersive videos that Apple has been producing that are just profound. I mean, talk about empathy and putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. When you can literally like put on a pair of goggles and see the world from a different perspective, I think that's going to be empowering, not just for creativity, but for like mental health. If you have somebody who doesn't understand their daughter's dyslexia or anxiety, if you had a story, an element, a story that you could tell through goggles, through putting somebody literally in somebody else's perspective that allows them to better grasp that, that's not just great for storytelling. I think that could fundamentally change how we interact with one another, because now I see the world the way that you see it. And so I think what I'm really excited about are these stories that are going to put people literally in the perspective of somebody else. I watched an immersive video of a hot air balloon pilot. That's not a world that I've ever once thought I was curious about or needed to know more of. But watching this woman and hearing her story about why she got into it, and just watching the joy that she takes out of flying these people in hot air balloons was so profound. It was so much deeper than watching a movie. It was literally like I understand her in a way that I don't think I would after a 3-hour conversation just by watching a 3-minute video. And I think that, to me, that is the most exciting thing about new technology, is what is going to allow for storytelling, for creators to come up with totally new ways to tell stories that get people to engage in just ways that haven't been possible before.
Reminds me, at a conference a couple of years ago, there was a booth kind of next to my booth, my company's booth, and these are very like charged words, but they basically said we have a VR that gives you perspective of a person with schizophrenia, and it's also an escape room. So I just saw
Oh,
like
wow.
VR schizophrenia escape room. I'm like, this could be really intense. But me and a couple of colleagues went, we tried it, and it was cool. It was more educational. It was more
Yeah.
like, oh, learning about facts, and you're in this virtual escape room. You have to find clues to like get out or something. And so the whole time it was kind of conveying the disorienting nature of schizophrenia and some of the symptoms, hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations. But it also was teaching you about what the illness is and
Yeah.
statistics and stuff like that. But that just struck me as, oh my goodness, if you kind of can work this out, it can be a highly, highly empathic tool to kind of literally put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
Um, I know we've talked about this too, but I would love to see. It's hard to replicate, but the magic of a performance of someone like you, or a TED Talk, or someone that kind of does these really powerful performances, having that be a VR experience as well. Dude, I would imagine you being able not just to perform and speak, but to own the space inside of a VR headset for
Yeah.
somebody and create a product, a package, an experience that is SE says and has all these different components to it that you control to tell your story. That is limitless. So I know there's so much there, and no, it's a lot to be exciting about, a lot to be excited about. So I know we're really close there. But dude, thank you so much. I do want to let you go. But the last thing is, I just want to have you talk about yourself for a little bit. What are you working on? What do you have coming on the rest of the year? Tell us about the stuff you're working on.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of keynote speeches lately. Actually, in more and more spaces, which I'm really excited about. Like professional development spaces, education training spaces. There are a lot of people really passionate about empathy right now, which I love. And so, still doing and going and doing these performances has been like so life-giving, and I'm like excited to keep doing that. I have a new program around resiliency. I've just like personally had to overcome a lot of things in my life that I'm now hoping to kind of channel and impart at least some encouragement for others to kind of see that the trials in their lives can actually help supercharge a lot of their own resiliency and better set them up for success later in life. I've also just released a new product called the Empathy Vault, which are an online course that kind of just goes through different aspects of empathy. Every time I perform, I usually get asked a bunch of different questions about empathy, and I don't always have the right amount of time to answer these questions. And so a lot of these videos are just kind of questions that I've been asked, like what is the difference between empathy and sympathy? How do you use healthy vulnerability? Where does curiosity play a role in empathy? And then my favorite is just like, how do we show ourselves empathy, self-empathy, self-compassion? And so each of these videos, they're very digestible. They're like 10 minutes. They'll include some personal anecdote and story, but also like why these are, what specifically these things like contribute to our empathy and to the world at large. So I'm calling it the Empathy Vault. I'm going to keep adding videos to this. There are currently 7 modules. I'm hoping to have that up to 12 by the end of the year. And I'm really excited to see the different ways that people utilize this. I think empathy can be such a powerful tool when used correctly, but I think a lot of us kind of just think of it as this ethereal thing. And I'm really excited to make empathy more tangible through this course. And so that's what I'm really excited about now. I've been recording these videos like off and on for the last 3 months. And every time I finish a video, I get really excited about it. So I'm excited to see how people use the Empathy Vault and then where it goes next.
That's beautiful. Empathy has such a place in my heart. Quick story. So when I studied psych in undergrad, I was like a psychology nerd since I was 15. I discovered it in high school, and is academic research, books, anything you can get your hands on, the DSM. I love that shit like from an early age. So I remember in college, one of the summers, like going into maybe sophomore or junior year, I was just neck deep in books and trying to just figure out what the key is. Like, how can we like get there and solve this and be less of an angry society and show love and just cure mental maladies, right? Like all these things. And it hit me one day. I was reading a book over the summer, empathy. Empathy is the key, man. Like you really will not have hate in your heart. You really can go throughout your days with more kindness
Yeah.
and consciousness if you can empathize with
Yeah.
strangers, empathize with your family members, with your friends, whoever it is. Empathy truly is that thing that unlocks a piece that I think we all crave. So, nah, man, this is why I'm drawn to you as a friend, as a professional. I really love following your work, and I really can't wait to see where you take empathy, where you take your work and your performances. So, Essie says, Andre, thank you so much, man. I appreciate the time, and talking again soon.
Love it, man. Thanks, Ryan.